Thank you and welcome all. So I have to say that when I got the invitation, so the organizers had impressed me that I could be participating in this impressive panel actually on the question of indeed the settlement then of the cash leg of wholesale financial market transaction in the presence of new technology, and then in particular in case of DLT. So but the organizers also impressed me actually with putting at the same time another new technology panel on stage, and that's in the back, it's the TV panel, which we would actually now put to good use because we would start actually with asking you some questions also to work with in the next part. So if you can already prepare the Slido, because we will use that, and the questions to the audience, because we will use that actually during the panel where we have like 3 main themes, and that's will DLT and other new technologies, or in particular DLT, be the future? How could such a future look like? And then of course, we go into the settling of wholesale financial market transactions, actually, the cash leg, in more detail, in more depth in this. So if you can you show the, I don't know whether the first results are there for the first question. So the first question on the Slido, do you? Yeah, so the first question is, do we need new technology or do we need DLT for settling wholesale financial transactions? And the possible answers were that no, that yes, as complementing existing infrastructure, or that yes, but and as a substituting the existing infrastructure. This is also a little bit on the questions that were also already covered in earlier panels. So just to get your flavor. So maybe we can close that question to see the result, yes. Okay, that's interesting. So yes, as complementing, that's somewhat more than about a half, a little bit more of this. And then I see the difference compared to some discussions earlier. So there's also, I mean, 40% and then somewhat more, saying no, we don't need it. And then yes, as substituting, which, okay, that's a very small fraction now as a full substitute. Of course, in line with an earlier panel we had today, this would anyway be far in the future, so difficult to say. So okay, good, thank you for that input. Next question then is for the expected time horizon then. Of course, that's in particular if you believe, well, okay, even when you believe you don't need it, but still, what is the time horizon for this? And there's also a multiple choice of for brackets. Okay, let's close that now for the, I mean, that's the significant update for the time horizon. Okay, so that is also in line with earlier discussions, so that there are some for the 1 to 4 years, then it's particularly the early adopters. Then the most are thinking of the 5 to 10 years, and also some a very significant part of above 10 years with some abstentions. Yeah, thanks for that. And now the last one, and we will take that into account in the discussion, of course, then during the panel, also those replies, and I asked then the panelists to have then views related to this explicitly or implicitly. And then the last one is of how this, I mean, is also informing the question of how could the ecosystem look like. It's on the question of how many DLT platforms you actually think that actually will coexist in a steady state. Okay, so we see that actually it's, so I cannot even see whether there's a number for the one. No, there's a small number. It's a tiny, so that there's one platform. Most actually, so the 2 to 5, yes, so the 2 to 5, that is 27%, similarly for the 6 to 15. Yeah, and then you see the distribution. So there is a variety and of course quite some uncertainty around it, but very few think that there would be actually one platform, which of course to some extent, I mean one platform having everything on one technology would make it very seamless, but the likelihood as per this survey, thank you a lot for this, is then not so high. Okay. Good, so now I turn to the panel. So also having actually the views of the audience on this in mind, Piero, I mean, what is your expectation about the use of DLT and speed of implementation?
Let me give you straight an answer. I think there is demand and there will be some action pretty soon. But this is not just my opinion. Let me share with you how I get there. We have been, at the Bank of Italy, we have been following this discussion about wholesale CBDC for a while. At the beginning, we were wondering what people was talking about, since we have been, dealing with, say, wholesale CBDC for a while. I mean, in Europe, we have Target 2 systems, so we were wondering what are people talking about when they say CBDC. Then we realized that people were thinking about having tokenized money on a DLT, also a new platform. Then the next question was, should we get involved on this? And before doing that, is there a real business case? Is there a demand for this? And the second question was, in case there is a demand, what do we do as a central bank? So the answer to your first question is exactly our first question. So is there any demand that would warrant for us an involvement on this? So we have been reading and following the international debate, but we want also to test the domestic water, whether we want to figure out whether there was an actual demand in Italy for that. So what we did, we took advantage of, we have an innovation center in Milan, which is called the Milano Hub, where we engage with the market to test their ideas, to help them to develop at a stage that, then they can go on the market. So this year we made a call for proposal centered on DLT. So the question was, what do you guys, do you have any ideas of new product, new solution that for financial market that you could implement through DLT? And with our huge surprise, that was a huge success. We received almost 60 applications from all over the world, academia, market, fintech, and the proposal were very good. Many were thinking, someone was thinking to use it for tokenized real assets. Some was thinking to use it for, treasury, to trade the treasury bills on the DLT. Somebody was thinking other solution, but certainly we saw a lively demand on that. So from our perspective, there is clear, something going on in the market. And this, pushed us to think to the second question, what do we do as a central bank? But eventually I will get to this question later on.
Okay, thank you, Piero. I mean, for this, I mean, so there is demand you refer to that you have seen, so revealed preferences. So, but Dirk, in your view, what are the true advantages compared to existing technology that is behind this?
I would say it depends. I'm not a lawyer, I'm an economist, but I say it depends. Because the previous discussions, I think, have already shown that either you look at DLT as a technology which should be applied or could be applied in the existing world, in the existing ecosystem, and then you try to fit it in somehow, or you take a visionary approach saying, okay, the future will look different and DLT can really help transform. So these are the two camps I actually see here. And maybe the challenge we are facing that the value proposition of DLTs, you have less intermediaries, you cut out the middleman, all this, but we are the middleman, no, somehow. So we are struggling here maybe a bit to find a clear balance and a clear role for ourselves. I work at CLS. So CLS, for those of you who don't know, so we are the settlement backbone of the FX ecosystem. So we settle every day the equivalent of 6.5 trillion US dollar, and we settle in 18 of the largest currencies of the world, and we do PVP. So we have two cash legs, so to speak, no? And we are struggling precisely with these questions around DLT, because if we look at our existing business model, what can DLT do? What are our user needs? What are the business requirements? Can DLT help us to further mitigate FX settlement risk? Not necessarily. Can it help us make things faster? Maybe also not necessarily, because we also offer, for example, one service, which is called CLS Now, which is same day. So we're really struggling to see from today's perspective, in today's role, also the liquidity saving mechanisms we have to make it fit into a DLT world. But the future might be different, no? And we see this also in all the experiments that many market players are conducting. You only need to look at what the BIS, for example, does in their innovation hubs. It's amazing. All these ideas around how the future cash settlement, cross-border cash settlement could look like. Fascinating ideas, but this is about the future. It doesn't look at really how things are done today. But I think for us it's important to follow that closely. I think that was also one of the conclusions drawn in previous panels, and to be prepared. And if we all collectively go in this direction, that we then eventually arrive at this different world, at this transformed world.
And that's already moving indeed into the question of how the future looks like, to understand better of what is driving this. And there, actually, Rom, indeed from your point of view, so is this a question of technology that we're having, or is it a question, a greenfield approach? So it's a good opportunity to rethink of what is the market structure and how should the market function?
Thank you. So first of all, just to introduce myself again. So Rhomaios, CEO of Fnality International. For those of you that don't know, we are creating a set of payment infrastructures in several jurisdictions, starting off with UK, US, Europe, and then moving on to other jurisdictions. The special thing about them is they're all based on DLT technology. So in effect, we're, I guess you could articulate what we're doing as essentially creating a private sector answer to wholesale central bank digital currency. So let me go back to what Dirk was saying. Actually, I think I can tie it back to what a couple of the earlier panels said. I think, Dirk, the split that you made between those people that want to look at this as kind of an incremental automation is absolutely correct. I'm personally a bit skeptical about that. And there's others that want to look at this as a complete paradigm shift. So the very first panel, I think Martin and Jen both said that there's a model change that's coming. And actually, I thought Vipin did a really great job of articulating precisely what that model change is. It's really all about pre-funding. So the question is, so Vipin got applause. I'm probably going to get rotten eggs thrown at me. But anyway, let's go for it. The question is, everyone, well, the thought in my head is everyone in this room is going, pre-funding, that's never going to happen. That's kind of the thought bubble that's coming out of all of our heads. The question is that really a true assumption? And so the reason I question it is I came from the trading side. I was involved in FX markets when they went electronic, quite heavily actually. And what we saw was that the average side of a transaction went down and down and down for many, many years, but the volumes went up and up and up. So it was more and more trades happening at a smaller and smaller size, but the overall volume was increasing massively. And that it actually took our risk down overall as a set of traders because we could get in and out much more quickly. And the internet kind of enabled all of that. What I observe now is that the settlement side, while it's technologically possible, hasn't been able to match the trading side in terms of what's going on. And so there probably needs to be a paradigm shift where it's possible that actually pre-funding in very small amounts, where the velocity of the collateral moves around much faster, is where the future is going. And so this is the way that I would describe a potential model change. So I guess the answer to the question is I think it is possible for this all to change, but for me, it's not about incremental automation type changes. It's about a fundamental model shift. And then the question comes, well, what's the right technology for that, et cetera, et cetera. I actually also agree with lots of the panelists that have said, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be DLT. I think that's definitely true in many cases. But there are some particular things where DLT is well suited, where there are multiple participants all trying to connect with each other somehow and see and share the same data. And the reason is not because, you know, I mean, it would be pretty easy to have a single database with an API that everyone connects to and everyone can see the data. So I don't think that's a good argument for it. For me, the main arguments are around two things. One is resilience per unit cost. So blockchain is just much more resilient than other types of technologies inherently because you have multiple nodes and it's hard to take them all down, all of that kind of stuff. And then the second thing is around sort of a technical term. I call it composability. Some people call it programmability, but the ability to stack developments on top of each other. So I'm going to stop there because otherwise I'll get a bit too technical. And back to.
Thank you. Haruna, so what are your expectations of how the future could look like?
Thank you. We come from a small market, and I always like to tell this story. And I mentioned it at ESA a couple of days ago, 2 weeks ago. When I used to travel around Europe, I couldn't get a phone line because I was not resident anywhere. They didn't have pay-as-you-go. MTN came to Nigeria and brought pay-as-you-go. I believe 95% of phone lines in Africa are pay-as-you-go. Europe has adopted it. Now, with DLT, I'm looking for a solution that would fit the environment that we're in. Every time we talk about that our market is pre-funded, people look at us and say, are you crazy? Why is your market pre-funded? We operate a no-fail market. All right? Now, why do we do that? There are structural, if you like, inefficiencies that are there that has forced us to do pre-funding. Again, when we settle, we operate a no-fail market. So many people have reasons why they want to adopt new technology, but I'm still struggling like vaping to see why is the value proposition in small markets like ours, all right, for DLT. We still are seeing use cases that are not correlating to what's happening in our markets. What we need to do is integrate. So let me give you an example. SWIFT is everywhere, but intra-connectivity in Nigeria, we don't use SWIFT. We do it with custodians once in a while for reporting, and they do it externally. But we have an efficient payment system in Nigeria in the sense that with a mobile phone, you could transfer money, you could deposit money, you could make payments, you could do. It's a very robust system, and that's because we don't have certain things. SWIFT is used for external rather than internal. Mostly what we do is use APIs within ourselves. So I love the idea of DLT. At CSCS in Nigeria, we've done a POC in terms of announcements from the exchange to us, to custodians, to registrars. Yes, we've done it. And then what? So the issue around Spotify, like Phil said at ESA, you know, you used to buy CDs or LPs, or you stack them and then you know had a playlist, you convert it to MP3. Nobody buys records anymore. We rent it. All right? The issue about Uber that was mentioned earlier, the same thing. We need something that will solve the problem. It's nice. It does the resilience. We like all of that. But then how does it work for us? We need to find that, spark But I can tell you, when we do find the spark, we tend to jump, especially in new markets, to new ideas and quickly adopt. So far, we haven't seen it. But will it come? Certainly, it's most likely. But let's find the right model that would excite us, and then we're on it. Thank you.
How does this link, I mean, and the model change that you also mentioned, and the thinking of what are the points that we want to improve? How does that link to the discussion we had earlier on the settlement cycles? I mean, that it's actually, would it be a shortening? Is it actually about making the economy and the financial system more immediate, kind of? Is that behind? And then, as Rom, you said, then it is a question, what is the right technology for that? So that's what is wanted, and what are the implications for this? Yeah. Well, anybody else then afterwards as well, yeah, but yes.
So I'm pro shortening the circle. I mean, I know there are difficulties in terms of legacy systems, legacy processes, and all of that. But I keep making this example. I have a 21-year-old son who I ask daily, look, why are you not playing our markets and you're going there to buy small Bitcoins around the world? He says, Dad, I buy something from Amazon in the morning, I get it in the evening. If I don't like it, I return it. In your market, I have to wait 3 days. You know, and these are the new generation that are adopting the infrastructure called the phone and constantly are on it. If you take away a phone from a, and again, in Nigeria, the population, I think 60% of the population is under 25. And that's the market we have to service. We don't have FX liquidity, so we have to build internally a strong domestic market. And those are the guys that are saving, that are beginning to get to work life, and all of that. So the idea about shortening transaction cycles, the issue around pre-funding, no-fail markets, and all of that are what works for us. And you know, we are in Nigeria working towards certainly a T+2, if possible a T+1. But then, you know, the external, if you like, considerations for custodians, banks, and all of that, we have to take into consideration. But should we go there? Why not?
But is it, again, is it really a question of technology? Because our settlement and payment systems, they can deliver this now. So what's, Dirk?
Thank you. It's really, I think we have to distinguish between the settlement cycle and, as you said, this true settlement. I heard this earlier today in the first panel, but I heard that before. And I also read glossy reports where the statement is made, sorry, I don't want to be disrespectful to that, but I often read that there's T+2 in the FX space, and that's an imperfection which has to be overcome. And with the DLT experiment, you prove that it can be done. But this gives a bit the impression that T+2 is a technology issue. In my belief, it isn't. It's a market convention. It's in the FX space, it's an agreement. You can do T+1, you can do instant, you can do T+14 as you did 200-300 years ago. It's absolutely no problem. And also the instant is something you also can do today with today's infrastructure. So maybe not necessarily with you don't need DLT for that. So my point being that we have to be very careful in looking at the argumentation used and be very precise on what are the pain points, what do we want to overcome here, and what are the solutions. In my view, as I said, T+2 is not a technology issue, it's a market convention.
Okay, Nick?
Yeah, and if I could come in here, I mean, I think it's also not necessarily a payments issue, right? I mean, as people, as individuals, we expect everything to get faster, right? It's all about convenience, and I think we've just highlighted that in that panel, and that comes across to our business area as well. But if we look just at, say, the cross-border payment space, now with Swift GPI, 46% of those payments are received by end beneficiaries in 5 minutes, right? So, and that's happening without DLT. Now, there are many use cases where DLT could be extremely useful, and you may have seen we've recently done experimentation around applying DLT to corporate actions, because we think there's some aspects of DLT that can be very useful in terms of being able to reconcile corporate actions information after the fact. But I totally agree with Dirk here. This is not a technology question, it's a business model question. And it requires the industry to agree to move to a certain new paradigm. And that's where I think the role of collaboration and bringing the industry together as a community is vitally important.
And to get such a consensus, if one looks, I mean, then it's very consistent with the timeline that actually that was in the first questions of how long it could take to actually get there. Okay, then I go to the, I mean, Nick, there was also a question that we had on the number of DLT platforms that would coexist. So what is your, what would you have as an insight from your perspective on this?
Thank you. I mean, I think the insights that were shared on Slido here are actually indicative of the diversity of views about the number of platforms that we will have. But I think what was very insightful, as you highlighted here, Holger, right? There was only 1% that said there would be one platform. So I think we will see a diversity of platforms. And so if we look, and as we've seen across the sessions already today, you know, new digital platforms are being built, whether it's by Clearstream, whether it's by DTCC, whether it's by others. This is happening. It's also happening in the payments arena as well. So you've got now over 100 countries experimenting with a CBDC based on different use cases and based on different technologies. So I think what that all means, both on the security side and on the payment side, we will see a diversity of platforms and technologies. And as the people on this panel know, even if you choose DLT, DLT is not one thing, DLT is many things. And so I think what then we need to be thinking about as a result is, okay, so this actually could lead to greater fragmentation, not less fragmentation. We could, if we don't think about it up front, end up with what I call digital islands that we then need to be able to connect up. And so the sort of challenge that we set ourselves as Swift, and we don't do this on our own, we do this working together with all the parties in this kind of industry, is to really think about how do we ensure interoperability between this diversity of DLT platforms and between those DLT platforms and the existing infrastructures which will undoubtedly exist for many years to come. Coexistence is going to be a fact of life here.
Okay, thank you. And actually, just before, because now that brings us to the third block, and actually, just for housekeeping, could I please have the control of our presentation, because that's what I would like to do next, because there were the question, I mean, after all, this is now about the cash leg. Okay. So, which was also referred to in earlier panels, also saying that that actually, so what is being done, be it by the private sector solutions, be it actually for central bank money settlement. Now, I hope that I will find the right button there. Okay. So let's see. Yes. So basically, I mean, I don't have to go into many details in this audience of how infrastructure and how payments and security settlement is being made. So normally, depending on the audience, I do this in an animated, with some animation to explain that of how something moves in Dirk's case for the dollar and the euro from one account to the other on each of the sides, or actually the same then for the security part. But I thought that we can do that faster here. And of course, what's useful also to keep in mind is that for money and security, so in the traditional technology, so CSD, central banks, and others play actually a key intermediation role also as bookkeepers here and as operators of centralized platforms and market infrastructure. So, and that actually when one wants to work between the platforms, one has to rely a lot on the reconciliations and also third parties for this. So what would change if we go to DLT? And of course, all these are simplified overviews, like I did not show now here on that slide, the T2S or so. But so if we go to DLT, the simplified overview, also when we spoke, when preparing for what we would do, or considering how would we engage ourselves, most points, I think we try to summarize that with 3 points of that with distributed ledger technologies, so money and securities or other digital assets could be recorded on a shared network in the form of tokens, okay. And you see them here, you see here on this DLT platform, you see actually there's a dollar token, there's a euro token, and these brownish things are supposed to be the securities, and in the middle, but also on the sides are contract, like these smart contracts, that can be done also in a decentralized way. So the difference to before is that the CSDs, central banks, commercial banks, would jointly share the roles of bookkeepers and operators of the infrastructure. And most of, I mean, if I summarize that in very few points, of course, when we asked for it, we got more. But there is this atomicity, so, which I'm always struggling of how to define it. I think it is like such a DVP or PVP that it's automated and you do not have to rely on a party to do it. That's my working definition, but I'm not sure, there might be a better one. Then there is this possibility for this decentralized programmability, so that it's not, you do not just take pre-configured data like, okay, I pay my rent at the end of the month. That's an easy decentralized programmability, but of course that can be much more complex than that. And then the ease of reconciliations. And in the panels before, of course, there was a point of, well, central banks are not moving much on this, so what could be done? And that's where we looked into, so what can we do as conceptual solutions? And we also made an announcement that I show afterwards, end of April, that we would be ready to explore this together with the market in the dialogue, because, well, there are the diversions of views of what will happen. So one is, if one thinks of, these are the market DLTs, and here there are ones, I just look here at security, so this brownish points. How can we do the cash-like settlement? And one is, and of course, one is that actually we could settle these transactions actually with existing technologies. Be it an RTGS, be it an instant payment system, doesn't matter, but I mean, they're the Bundesbank, Banca d'Italia, for those who have looked at experiments or publications, they know that they have worked on that. So that's something which can relatively easily be done. And the other one, similar in type, in concept, is also relying on interoperability, and that's actually then an interoperability where then the central bank money would be actually put on the DLT platform, and then actually is also the market DLTs connect to that one. Of course, if you want to look at that more generally, it's not just about central bank money, because the concepts work for whatever is used for the cash leg. So that's the interoperability type. Others are that there would be one platform that actually, a DLT platform, that has the asset and that has then the assets that are to be settled. So we call that the integration approach. I mean, just our name. So it's kind of like a T2S, not on steroids, but on a DLT, kind of, to put it that way. And fourthly, that would be something, well, it's not so unknown to central banks to actually give the money away, so the token away, to actually other platforms. So we would distribute it elsewhere, because we do that kind of with banknotes. We issue them and then they circulate somewhere. But of course, in a digital world, that would be less of a control for the central bank, at least at first sight of this. So I think that 3 and 4 are like more complex to implement and to be sure that there's no double spending and everything in there. So, but those are the concepts that we have said we would be ready to explore. And that's briefly just, that was our press release that at the end of last month, that we want to explore those options together with the market. So we have then the objectives to consolidate further, develop the ongoing work there, and gain insights into how we can do it, and also to see that actually we can both support the innovation, but also, I mean, that we can actually maintain the, for us, important role and useful role of central bank money as like a monetary anchor for the system. And there we are setting up now, these days, actually a market contact group to give comments to us, so to help, I mean, to support us on this. And then we can later actually have then actually a more kind of getting interest from the market in practical work to actually do those, whether it's on the DVP or the PVP. So more to follow, I mean, more will come on that. But that was just to set the stage, because it's always in the abstract term, so how does it work? So these are like settlement models we thought these are the concepts that could work. So thank you, I think we don't need the presentation now anymore. So now, I mean, as said before, many say that once there's DVP, everything will be this atomic, so the automatic straight-through end-to-end processing. But here also with the, I mean, we showed there might be interoperability models. Also, there might be several DLTs. So how can one achieve such a thing when there are several platforms, ROM? How could this work?
Yeah, so I mean, we've been working with a bunch of the other market participants on protocols that allow us to settle without the need for a third party in the settlement. So I think Ian, who was on the previous panel, sort of mentioned it with HQLAX, et cetera. So it's pretty straightforward, and we've demonstrated that you can settle between different types of DLT platforms relatively straightforwardly. You know, all of these things, as we said earlier, are not really a technology problem. The technology can sort of overcome them. They're really a market, it's back to the market convention problem. So I guess the first question is, are there going to be multiple DLTs, which is the question the audience answered. I'm actually a firm believer that there will be multiple DLTs because they'll all be optimized for the specific asset or asset types that they're trying to settle. Then you have to have this interoperability. There will be a protocol around them. It's kind of like the internet, right? So the internet isn't one giant internet across the globe. There's several internets that all connect to each other. The internet in China is a bit different from the internet in the West, and it's a bit different from the internet in India, et cetera, et cetera. It's a bit like that with DLT platforms. But again, then it becomes a question of how do you govern all of that stuff. And I think this is the area where kind of the old world and the new world are currently meeting. So Martin in the earlier panel was saying how important it is to have you know, the right approach by the regulators and have everything regulated to assure safety, et cetera, et cetera. I think it will be impossible to do that if you have multinational DLTs. So my view is there'll be multiple DLTs, each regulated by the appropriate regulator for that specific asset type in each jurisdiction. And they will all be able to technically interoperate. When you look at the PFMIs, there's this whole thing about linking FMIs. And so there is already a framework for how that can happen legally and so on.
Okay, thank you. But how does one actually, I mean, how does one actually, well, working out the standards and actually make them, getting them implemented for the interoperability? How can one do that? So how can one actually get that into the market? I mean, that would be my next question. Also on where does Swift experience? You work with several of that. How have you dealt with that? What's your experience there?
Yeah, so we've picked this up in a number of different ways. So one of the things that we did last year was we did a set of experiments around tokenized assets, and we looked at connecting to different new digital token platforms. And then we also looked at different cash leg types, and we successfully demonstrated that we could orchestrate across those different platforms, different forms of tokenized securities based on bonds and shares, and then also cash leg types, so some more conventional cash leg types, as well as a simulated CBDC. So through that experimentation, which we did collaboratively with Clearstream, Northern Trust, Citi, and Settle, we demonstrated this is all possible, right? However, I think when we then think about the cash leg, we've also then gone further than that. And Holger, I very much welcome the initiative that you described for the Eurosystem, because I'm a strong believer in collaborative innovation in this space. So in using CBDC as an example, what we've developed is an experimental interlinking solution that can connect across different DLTs and also with different centralized architectures. We tested that solution in Q4 last year with 18 central and commercial banks, including members of the Eurosystem, such as the Bundesbank and the Banque de France. And they basically saw clear potential and value in that solution and encouraged us to go further. And so that's what we've done this year, is to develop a more robust beta version of that solution, which we're now also going in to test with central banks, being able to connect that solution to their test networks. And we will then be expanding out the use cases of that solution from payment transfers and payment versus payment into delivery versus payment, as well as exploring some of the important kind of considerations that I think people have started to already highlighted here around particularly FX and liquidity. So I think we're all on this kind of journey kind of together, but I think that concept of interlinking, which is a technical connection between the networks, will be vital to bring to life the kind of configuration that Rom has described as we go forward in the future.
Piero, can you give more background on the and reasoning on the Eurosystem initiative, and also do you have a view of whether one of these models that were shown, or whether some, I mean, what could be the outcome of this exercise?
Yeah, this is a difficult question because I have a vested interest, obviously, in answering this question, being, one of the central banks that actually has proposed one solution. So, obviously, we were in the team of those that suggest that go first with the current infrastructure. Let me explain why I am in this team. First of all, remember what we said before. Many of the things we are talking about today can be done with the current system. Target 2 Security does an excellent job. It settled 700,000 transactions per day for a value that is something south of 1 trillion per day. So with all the security, the cyber resilience that we have, so we start from a high standard. So we have to improve over that. And when we start to think about this cash solution, how can we provide the cash legs to the transaction performed on DLT? We thought that we had 3 criteria to kind of satisfy. One was to act first, swiftly. We need to provide an answer to the market in a short time, because otherwise the market will rely on private money, which is extremely dangerous from a central bank point of view, because there is credit risk associated. So for us, the principle that to settle in central bank money is essential. So be quick. The second, avoid fragmentation of the liquidity. I am here now that there are possibilities that to transact across DLT. My technician, my people from cyber resilience, they tell me that it's very dangerous. When you move from an asset from one DLT to another, that's where the weak link is. So we have to be extremely careful. So we have to avoid fragmentation of liquidity. And the third point that I never hear discussed is the monetary policy implication. When you guys start to play with central bank reserves, you are talking monetary policy. So how are we going to conduct monetary policy in a new complete environment? I don't know. Nobody, I guess, knows, because we haven't seen any solutions. So if you look at this, how to optimize along these 3 criteria, we thought that if we could rely on the current solution for the cash leg, linking them to the DLT, then that could be an optimal solution, at least for the period of time we have been seeing before the market fully develops its own solution. That's why we invented this solution that we call the bridge solution. We published a paper last year, is in the Bank of Italy website, where we were able to link the current target system. We use TIPS for the specific, but just because TIPS runs for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but it can be integrated with the current, with Target 2, and so for us, in the short term, this is the optimal solution.
And then an open question to the other panelists also, I mean, is there one of from the kind of conceptual models that I showed, is there something where you say in advance that looks like more likely, or are you agnostic, so under the scenario that that the market will adopt the DLT, of course, but would you be agnostic then to whatever comes out as long as as long as actually there are no frictions in the system, like because of the protocols or so? So anybody who is saying I have a specific view, or are you rather agnostic about it?
Maybe one comment would be that there will be trade-offs in this, right? So as you very clearly articulated, as you go from top to bottom, you trade off ease of implementation, right, against some potential advantages that you could get from a more single solution. We're open to exploring all of those, but I think you've probably got clearly in mind that there will be quite a lot of trade-offs, and therefore it's likely that we will land probably, you know, more likely to be landing somewhere in the middle where we're trying to achieve benefits from the new technology, but equally we have to be realistic about how it can connect up with the existing infrastructure.
Coming from our market, say in Nigeria and then of course Africa as a whole, I was listening to some data this morning that says that 25% of the trade that occurs by nations is intra-Africa. 75% is outside Africa with other countries, whether it's America, Asia, or Europe. If I'm going to South Africa, my South African friends are here, I need a visa. Within ECOWAS, I don't, but there are 58 countries in Africa or territories. You find that there's so much fragmentation from a political aspect. There's so much that we can do to integrate. Let me give you an example. Dangote is probably the richest African that does business in Africa. If Dangote is he's building cement factories across Africa. But if he's going to Namibia or he's going to Kenya, he needs a visa. His pilot is Swiss. So the pilot gets into immigration before he does. Yet he's invested in Africa. Now, if you can find some solution from providers, SWIFT, solve the problem of intra and the connectivities that's required, the adoption for us will be faster because there is economic value in doing that. Cross-border connectivity transactions intra-Africa would be a key driver for my thinking as myself as a way to go forward. And you would see a faster adoption with a huge market, whether it is emerging or otherwise. But that's where I see, if you ask me, the direction in which the investment should go to get adoption of DLT.
Okay. Thank you. Then actually, Dirk, so, I mean, what does it mean for CLS? So, because of course, you said before, it's not the technology. So, what does it mean for you, this, and for CLS?
Yeah, for us, I think it's a very specific case. No, we settle the cash legs underlying a trade in our books at CLS Bank, but the funding happens via the RTGS systems. So for us, the question is, what if an RTGS system would move to DLT and would move then de facto to CBDC maybe? And we see this in all these experiments out there where there are ideas about different DLT-based CBDCs coexisting, and then there's an interlinking between the two or three or whatever, how many systems, and in this interlinking also the FX conversion and eventually the FX settlement occurs. There are some specific mechanisms used. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but one is this called HTLC, hash time lock contracts, which is more a script. So you put a passphrase and you do this within a given time frame, and then you get the money. So there's some conditionality ensured via a script, via a program. Whether this is good enough in our complex world, in our FX business, giving also the systemic relevance, it's, I don't know, maybe not. But this is where we need to look at. What if we have different DLT-based systems? Interoperability is the current arrangement we are having, where there's a CLS kind of synchronizing operator in between. Is this the right model? Or do we need to look at something else? But this is really more far out. But this is an important point we're looking at.
Okay, so do we still have time for opening question? Or? Yes, yeah. So then, I mean, thanks for that. I would now open actually to the audience. So if you have questions to the panels, and of course the difficult ones I deflect to my colleagues here on stage. I can sit back and relax. Please, yes.
Just a comment and then a question. Your slides on the process were very reminiscent of the hub and spoke models that we used to discuss for connecting CSDs 15 or 20 years ago, and hopefully DLT will be more successful than the hub and spoke. We've had a very public failure of a CSD in pursuing a major DLT initiative. I'd be interested in your perspective. Should we take that as cause to pause in terms of the potential or where we're going with DLT? What should we take from the experience that our friends in Australia have had?
Would somebody, I mean, of course, it's difficult to talk about somebody else. I don't know whether somebody wants to do it, but of course, one really has to look at, is that the question of the technology? Is that the question of what many have said now before, that there was not enough dialogue? Was it a project management issue? So I do not...
My question is more to the point, has that been cause for pause for any of you in your enthusiasm about DLT, regardless of what caused it? Such a public failure, has that caused you to be rethinking in any way your thoughts on where DLT is going in our industry?
Let me speak as a small market. I think the more mature markets are free to say something. But the truth is, yes, it has. Because it was such a flagship for many people. In Nigeria, we use NASDAQ as a matching engine. We had just used it for about 6 years, and the issue of ASX and what they were building from a vertical end. And I remember in Cybos in Sydney, which was my first Cybos, there was so much talk about where Australia was going to go, and they were given a stage to actually speak about it and do it. So it gave us some ideas around, okay, we're a small market, but we can also quadruple in terms of progress in solutions. So every day we think about what's happening in Australia. Is it going to work? If it's not working, then we have to think about, where we're going and how fast we'll go, especially around DLT within the securities market.
Thanks. Piero on this?
I mean, this is one reason for being prudent from the cash leg side, right? I mean, we need to be ready to accommodate what the market is doing from the asset side, because we don't control that. What market will invent new solution. The issue is, should central banks stay in the game or not? And if they want to stay in the game, as they should, otherwise the market will rely on private money solution, how could they minimize the cost and the risks? So that's why the idea of connecting what we have already today to allow the market to develop, to me, is the safest strategy. You stay in the game, you don't waste money, you don't waste time, and at the same time you guide it, you avoid the risk that the market goes in a direction which would be extremely dangerous from a financial stability point of view.
Yeah.
I don't have any particular insights on ASX, but I would say that if you have a market critical infrastructure, then when you're making a technology selection, there are a few things that you crucially always need to think about. One is, what is the use case you're trying to solve for? The second is, what is the scalability and the maturity of that technology? And the third is, how is that technology going to be able to interact with your existing technologies that you have in your system? That, this is not going to be an island, so how is it actually going to work with everything else that you have? And I think those principles serve anybody well when they're trying to figure out whether it's DLT or something else.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I mean, you'd be foolish not to pause at something like that happening. it actually has made me think about, well, what's the best implementation methodology? So there's basically two methodologies. One is try and do some sort of hybrid thing where you try and link up with existing stuff and you kind of hook things together in some sort of hybrid way. That actually was a path that we were on for some time. I'm actually not convinced that that's the right way to go anymore because it's so risky for our bank clients, for example, to switch over from whatever they're doing now based on SWIFT and blah, 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 blah. It's like obviously payments is like the function that they, or one of the functions that they perform.
Microphone, closer.
Oh, sorry, yeah. The other way that you could do it is actually slightly more incremental and smaller. Maybe there are some DLT issuances of specific securities or whatever, and then there's some cash that deals specifically for them, and it happens in a kind of a more isolated environment, and you start to learn more as that grows. That also has drawbacks, obviously, because to some extent you're fragmenting your liquidity and so on, but it's a question of how much money do you burn before you find out whether it's going to work or not. So for me, the second method is probably the better method.
Thank you. Other questions? There's one in the back.
Thank you. Hugh Simpson. Maybe it's a question for the audience more than the panel. I'd be interested to hear if there's any experience from other parts of the world, for example in Asia, where I know there have also been some interesting experiments and models with DLT and tokenization. We've heard a lot about Europe. What's happening in the rest of the world?
So, of course, it's difficult from us now to actually ask really the audience, but what I can reassure that, for example, and they were mentioning here of the BIS Innovation Hub, which is a global initiative with also a lot of Asian players being very active, where also, I mean, also European ones were involved, and we are in any case, I mean, both firsthand and also in talking with them actually to gain from the experience and what to do. That includes actually also questions like Dirk raised of what could be the FX model, etc. What does it mean in our case then actually for access to central bank money, which again is not a technology decision, it is a policy decision of whether to broaden it and whether to make the one or the other possibility for dealing with FX questions then easier. But no, so there is quite an exchange, I mean, certainly on the central bank side, but actually also together with the private sector there on this. So that I can say. Yes, Nick?
Yeah, I can maybe add a little bit to that because in the CBDC sandbox that I talked about earlier, we had participants from across the world, in particular, including Asia. So, for example, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan, just to mention a few. I do think what that highlights, or the question highlights, is actually that sharing of knowledge from different institutions is actually vitally important in this space. And so when we ran the sandbox in the 12-week period, one of the things that we did was every 2 weeks we gathered together everyone to talk about some critical design issues, and everybody had been exploring different business and technology issues. And so by learning and sharing that information, we got a long way in a short period of time. So I don't have insightful kind of answers to you in terms of the development, but I think actually learning from across the world is very important.
Dirk, yes?
Just one small addition, if I may. Since the BIS in their public reports say that 9 out of 10 central banks are exploring with the technology, it's difficult to single out anyone here, in particular when it's about wholesale, CBDC, but the guys that have been at the forefront already back in 2015-16, there were clearly Canada, there was Singapore, and they are still working on these experiments. I should also say, what you see a lot maybe publicly, but I should also say that many central banks and also private sector entities are maybe less vocal. Producing the reports and going out there and explaining what their experience is doesn't mean necessarily that it's only them doing it. From my experience, I would say most of them are really doing it even if they don't speak about it.
Okay, thank you. So So basically, I actually had considered whether to ask everybody on the panel for the takeaways, but in the given the time, I do another approach where I give my subjective summary, and then that can be maybe more lively discussions over lunch, in particular if you disagree with me. But so, I mean, a key question that was discussed now, and where the answer is actually out. So is there a market drive for more this kind of immediacy, so for a model change or whatever this was called, and then the verdict on the technology that would be used at this moment is out. And of course, there are quite some who propose that actually it's a DLT, but it's not necessarily the case. And then the other point is where I think there was more clarity that I mean, from both the public and the private sector, so that if there is a move of the market to DLT, so there will be ways to settle that, and there will be efficient ways. Of course, there are some conditions to be met, and that can be in particular like to counter also the fragmentation, both actually at the cash side, but also on the security side. But this panel is, of course, on the cash, but so that there is really a point in case for standardization, agreeing on protocols, which on the one side are good enough so that there's not refragmentation of the market, and on the other side, they do not actually prevent then innovation actually, of course, also going forward. Okay, so that were my subjective conclusion and takeaways from the panel, so happy for a discussion then later over lunch. Thanks. And thank you for the panel.